Okay, I'm back on my website here for Ubuntu, and it is at ubuntu.com. And it is the latest version of Ubuntu 20.04 LTS that we're looking at right here. It has been released, of course, back in April, and it is has a name of focal foci. I've already been running it on my laptop and on my desktop as well, and I love it. It's a great operating system, so we'll get into it. Today we're going to concentrate on installing a virtual machine of it. And so the first thing you need to do is you need to go to this website, ubuntu.com, click on the Ubuntu and go to the downloads link here, and you can see that you have two options, or actually more than that, but two options that most people go for. One is the Ubuntu desktop, and that is this button right here. If you want to install the Ubuntu server, you're more than welcome to do that, but remember, it does not have a GUI, so you will not be able to get into the GUI interface. Once that's installed, you'll have the terminal available only. Now, the server version is for Mac and Windows and ARM, IBM Power, and S390X. The desktop, we're going to put in a virtual machine, but you can obviously install this on bare metal. And in fact, I would recommend you install it on bare metal. But you know what I do is oftentimes is I install operating systems in a virtual machine the first time I encounter those, and I can take a look at them that way, and they're segments, separated from the rest of the operating system that I'm running. So if something happens to it, it crashes or whatever, it's not a problem. But now Ubuntu 20.04 will not. It's not going to crash on you, man. This is a tried and true operating system. Like I said, I've been using it for a while now since it came out, and haven't had any issues at all. So let's go ahead and get started with this. First thing you need to do is click on this button right there, and it's going to come out to a thank you for downloading Ubuntu desktop, and take you out here to actually download the ISO file and install it. Now, I've already done that, so I'm not going to do that again. I will tell you that if you want to, you're more than welcome to contribute to Ubuntu here on this page. You can contribute with PayPal, contribute any amount that you like, or you can tell it what you're doing, and it puts numbers in there, and then so when you go down to contribute, it tells you how much that they think that would be nice if you would contribute to them. If you come down to the bottom of the page here, you get more information on learn how to try Ubuntu before you install. Or do you want to upgrade your operating system? Now, you can click on this follow your simple guide, or our simple guide. Highly recommend you do that if you've never installed Ubuntu before. But if you already run Ubuntu, like 18.04 or 1910, you can come down here to the do you want to upgrade your operating system, and you can click on the how to upgrade link, and it'll take you out to walk you through the process of upgrading the operating system. There is an upgrader that is available from Ubuntu to assist with the process of upgrading, so that you don't have to do a fresh install, or what I call a wipe and load of your operating system. Okay, so let's get out onto my desktop again, and let me get into virtual machine. What I've done is I've gone up and I've downloaded an earlier version of VirtualBox, which is, I think, a 5.x version. Let's go back to about it's a VirtualBox5. Now, why have I done that? Well, I've had issues with 6.1, so I went back to 5 to see if those issues would go away, and for the most part they have. You may have no problem with VirtualBox 6.1. I'm not saying you shouldn't use it. I'm not saying you should not download it and use it. I just had issues with it on my system. I'm not sure why, but to get around that, I just went back to an earlier version. So I went back to VirtualBox5. So let me close that. So let's do this. Let's go ahead. What I did was I have a link out here, which is called File Store Vol 2 on Raspberry Pi. It's a SMB CIFS link to a spinning hard drive. And I have a folder here called isopool. If you double click on it, you can see that I have the Ubuntu 20.04 desktop LTS ISO there. So that's where we're going to grab it and use it from. I just wanted to show you that before we get started. It's not on the local machine. It's actually hanging out as a network attached storage device. All right. So let's get back into Oracle Virtual Machine VirtualBox Manager, and let's click on the New button here, and it opens this window, which is the name and operating system window. And so I'm going to call it Ubuntu. And you'll notice that when I typed in Ubuntu, it went ahead and put the version down here, what it thought I was trying to install. And that's good because you have a pull-down menu of a bunch of distros of Linux here that are available, even other Linux if you don't have one specifically assigned. And the reason for that is that each distro of Linux has its own particular attributes for setting up the hardware and things like that. And so if I were to, instead of Ubuntu, put in, for instance, CentOS, notice that it thinks that I'm going to CentOS. There we go. It thinks I'm trying to install Red Hat in 64-bit, and since CentOS is a community enterprise operating system based on Red Hat, that's good. Okay, so it knows, it's intelligent enough to know that I'm doing that. Now, you can install things other than Linux. You can install in your VirtualBox Solaris BSD, which is a Berkeley software distribution of Unix, IBM OS 2. I haven't seen that in a long time. Mac OS X and any other. Okay, so it by default is sitting on Linux, and so let's go ahead and put in Ubuntu, and I'm going to call it 20.04 LTS for the long-term support version of Ubuntu. And it did default to the Ubuntu 64-bit. That's exactly what I want, so let me click Next. Alright, so now we're up to memory size, and I have 16 gigs of RAM in this system, so I'm not really concerned about giving this thing, you know, I could give it 8 gigs for that matter, or up to 8 gigs and not be too concerned about it. But what I'm going to do is, what I normally do is give a distribution of Linux 4 gigs of RAM here. So I'm going to put in 4096. You can by default give it 2 gigs of RAM and be okay. And if you're running something that's, you know, XFCE desktop environment or a server, for instance, Ubuntu server, you could probably give this 1 gig of RAM and be okay, all right, because there is no desktop environment, no GUI. All right, so now that I've given it 4096, let's go ahead and click Next. And it's asking me, do you want to create a virtual hard disk now? Yes, I do, so let's click Create. And then it says the on this screen, hard disk file type. I'm going to be using the VDI or VirtualBox disk image. I want to click Next. And then I want it to be dynamically allocated as opposed to fixed size. So I'm going to make sure the radio button is ticked for dynamically allocated. Now, what's the difference? You may be asking yourself, what's the difference between dynamically allocating storage or allocating it on a fixed size? All right, so if I gave this let's say 20 gigabytes of VDI space, if I click the fixed size button here, what's going to happen is it's going to go out and allocate that fixed size of 20 gigabytes. If I click instead the dynamically allocated, it's going to start out with a lower amount or lesser amount than 20 gigabytes, and then it's going to, as needed, it's going to dynamically increase the size of that storage up to, but not exceeding the 20 gigabytes that I give it. Okay, so I'm going to click dynamically allocated. I'm going to click Next, and here's where I give it the actual size that I want. And dynamically, I'm going to give it 20 gigs. So it's going to start out smaller than 20 gigs, and then it's going to move up to the full size of 20 gigs as needed. It'll probably never get there because this is going to be a short-term virtual machine VM, and so we'll never reach that limit. But that's okay. All right, so let's go ahead and click Create, and that creates the virtual machine for Ubuntu 20.04. LTS. Now we could go ahead and start it by clicking the start button. I'm not going to do that because what I want to do is I want to tweak it a little bit. I want to get into the settings, if you will, and do some things. So I'm going to go ahead and click settings here. And under the general tab, there really isn't anything that I need to do here other than shared clipboard. I do want to do that at some point. So let's click away from disabled and let's do a bidirectional here for the shared clipboard. Drag and drop, we can change that from disabled to bidirectional as well, so that we have the ability to drag and drop from the host operating system, which in my case is Farron OS, to Ubuntu 20.04 LTS and back and forth. So, and likewise from 20.04 LTS back to my host machine. All right, so I've got that set. Click System. Base memory is still 4096. That's fine. I'm going to go ahead and untick the floppy because we don't have a floppy drive in this system, and I'm going to select the hard disk and move it up so that when we reboot, it boots up on the hard disk instead of the optical drive. All right. Don't need to make any other changes here. Let's click Display. Now we do have a graphical user interface here in this virtual machine, and we could leave it on 16 megabytes of virtual memory, or video memory, I mean. But I'm going to go ahead and bump it up to the full 128 megabytes of virtual memory. We only have one monitor. We're scaling at 100%. I don't care about the 3D acceleration for now. No remote display, and video capture is fine. If we leave those settings as they are, let's click on storage. And here I'm going to click the empty here under the IDE controller. I'm going to come across to the optical disk. This is the same as if you had a physical machine and you had an optical drive in it. So I'm going to click and open that, and then I'm going to choose a virtual optical disk file. Okay, then I'm going to go out to my downloads folder, and I've moved the ISO folder here for convenience, moved it under the downloads, and so I double click that. There's my Ubuntu 20.04 desktop LTS ISO. I'm going to select that and click open. And so that places that particular ISO file underneath here under the IDE controller. Okay, so this is like your regular physical CD-ROM drive. All right, think of it that way. Okay, so let's go ahead and click audio. And for audio, we're going to use the standard ICH AC97. We're going to enable the audio output. One of the things I do want to change here for sure is network. I'm using adapter 1 here for the network, and I have enabled that adapter. I can use it in as attached to NAT, which is a network address translation, but rather what I'd like to do is down arrow and select bridge adapter, and we're going to get an ENP2S0, which is Ethernet port 2 socket 0 connection here. And what that does is it allows the virtual machine to be on the same network that my host machine is on, because DHCP is going to assign here with the bridge adapter DHCP, or my dynamic host configuration protocol server running on my LAN, will assign an IP address to it, and I'll be able to touch it, ping it, do whatever I want to. All right, under serial ports, we don't need to make any changes here. Under USB, we want to tell it we're using USB 3.0 controller. For shared folders, we don't have any right now, but we could set up shared folders in here if we like. And under user interface, we don't really need to make any changes here either. So let's go ahead and click OK. And so we're ready to launch this thing. So let's go up and click Start and let it go. And I'm going to go ahead and click View Full Screen Mode, bring it up to full screen mode, and let it get started. Now it checks the disks automatically. Ubuntu does, and the installer, and so that's okay. It shouldn't find any issues because this is a brand new VDI, and so we'll let it do its thing and then let it come up to the installer itself, and then we'll get this thing installed. It will take some time to install, so what I'll do, I will pause the video and come back when it's done. Alright, so it should be coming up to the installer at this point. I don't expect it to be full screen. I'll be surprised if it is. I'll be happy if it is, but I don't expect it to be. And it is, so that's great. All right, so here is the operating system, and here's the installer. And when it comes up and opens up, you can do two things. You can try Ubuntu. You can do that. There's a live version of Ubuntu here, so you can try to make sure that that you like what you see, that the hardware is going to be found, and you're not going to have any problem. Now, this is a virtual machine, so I don't expect any hardware issues per se. It is on the English version here initially. If you wanted to change languages, you could do that, and of course then this language would change. For instance, French. Now we are in French. Okay, so this is great to have. Let's go back to English. I don't speak French, so let's go to click Install Ubuntu. And here we're going to be using the US English keyboard layout and US English here as well. All right, so let's click Continue. We're going to use the normal installation here. We're not going to do anything fancy. If you wanted to, if you were doing this on bare metal and you wanted to do a minimal install, you could click the minimal install button here, and you would only get web browser and basic utilities. If you do a normal installation, however, you get web browser, utilities, you get a full Office suite and other media players and other games and things like that. I'm going to leave it on, I'm going to do a minimal installation here because we're not going to save this VM anyway. And I can tick the box here that says download updates while installing Ubuntu. But to save time, I'm going to uncheck that or untick it. One good thing to have is if you're doing this on bare metal especially, and you have gaming card or something like that, you might want to install third-party software for graphics. If you're doing NVIDIA graphics or something like that, I'm not, so I'm going to click untick it, and this way it'll be quicker this way, take less time. Let's go ahead and click continue here, and when it comes back up, we're going to tell it to erase the disk and install Ubuntu. I'm not going to have any advanced features here. This is the installation type we're doing. We're not going to do something else. We're just going to erase the disk and install Ubuntu. So let's click install now. It says if you continue, the changes that you've listed will be written to the disk. That's okay. Let's click continue. And now it's asking what part of the world am I in. I'm in the New York City time zone in the United States. I'm going to leave it there. I don't reside in New York City, but that's closest to me. Let's click continue. What is your name? I'm going to go ahead and put my name in. Computer name, I'm going to call this thing Ubuntu 20.04 LTS VM. I'm going to pick a username. I'm going to call it Datapioneer, of course. Password, I'm just going to give it password. Okay. Require my password to log in. Of course, you would not use password for yours, but that's a weak password. Let's go ahead and click continue here. And it is off and running. So it's installing Ubuntu now. And when it finishes, I will be back. Okay, so the installation is completed, and we're at the screen right now for installation complete. It says it is completed, and we need to hit that restart button. It took about 10 minutes or so to do this install, and it was a minimal install, so I'm real happy with that, and so you will be as well. If you do a full install, expect it to be a little longer. I do have a kind of a fast machine here, so it's an i3, Core i3 7th generation processor with 16 gigs of RAM, so you can, kind of figure out how long it's going to take for you, but probably closer to 15-20 minutes if you're doing a full install, and if you're doing updates at the same time, may even take longer. So let's go ahead and click that restart now button and let this thing restart. Now remember, if you recall, I unticked the floppy and also moved the hard disk up into the boot order, so we should be able to, once we hit the enter key here, it should boot directly into the hard drive, should not go back to the optical drive, and it does. It is doing that, so that's fine. And so it is coming up to the Ubuntu 20.04 LTS operating system. Hopefully it'll come back to full screen, 1920 by 1080, 16 by 9 resolution, and it does. Alright, so let's go ahead and hit enter here and put in my password, which was password. All right. And now that we've done that, it should boot up into the operating system, and we can take a look at a couple of things. I want to get into the terminal. This is not a review of Ubuntu 20.04 LTS, so I'm not going to get into that. But once you get in here, you can connect your online accounts. I'm going to go ahead and skip that. You can set up live patch if you want. I'm not going to do that for this VM, so let's click next. Help improve Ubuntu, so you can send Ubuntu information or not. I choose not to send information. Click next. I don't want my operating system phoning home. For privacy, you can check to turn on location services. And you may want to do that if you're using things that are location specific. I'm not, and this is a virtual machine, so I'm going to click next. And then it says you're ready to go, and here's a list of software that is already installed and ready to run on your system. So I'm going to click done, and we're good to go. All right, so let's go down here to the application button, and let's come up to the terminal. Let me open the terminal here, get a terminal open, and let me expand this a little bit, and let's see if I can't bump that up for you. Okay, shift and let's see. Nope, that's not it. Oh, this is a virtual machine. It may not let me do that. Oh, there we go. All right, so let's go ahead and click, type in uname A, and let's see what kernel we have available. We're running Linux kernel Ubuntu 20.04 LTS virtual machine 5.4.0-42- generic. Okay, this is just giving us information to our date timestamp. So let's do a DFH to get a human readable on the file structure of the disks in use. And you can see that here we have for dev SDA1, which is the hard drive itself, we have 1% being used for boot EFI. And let's see, we have dev SDA5. That's the 20 gigabyte hard disk that we set up for VDI disk allocation. So dev SDA5 is the actual drive we need to look at. We're using 5.4 gigs, and so we're well under the usage here for the dynamically allocated drive. So we have 13 gigabytes of drive left. We're only using 30%, and that's mounted at the root of the file system. Okay. One of the first things you would like to do here, or should do rather, once you do a clean install, recommend this for any operating system that you set up, and distro of Linux specifically. Go ahead and do sudo apt-upgrade update and sudo apt-upgrade, and just do a Y switch so you don't get prompted for answering questions. So here I've combined the commands, two commands into one with a double ampersand, which means perform this part of the command if and only if this part of the command is successful. So let me go ahead and hit enter, and asking for my Datapioneer password, and it was password. So it's going to go ahead and run the updater and go out and update the operating system itself. And so it fetched 750 kilobytes in 1 second, and it's going to grab some things here and install those. If it doesn't take very long, I'll just go ahead and leave it in real time. It looks like it's going to grab quite a bit of stuff, and so what I'll probably do is stop the video and then come back and join you again whenever it's done. Okay, I'm back. We're at about 90% right now, and so we're about to wrap up this update. It did take about 5 minutes or 6 minutes to complete, or will by the time this is done. Didn't take very long to update the entire system, running the update and upgrade. I'm not going to do a distro upgrade here, although that's another thing that you might want to do. Sudo apt disk upgrade, dist-upgrade. You might want to run that. I'm not going to do that in this case. All right, so we're up to 99%, and we'll let this finish, and then we'll go ahead and close the terminal. Get back to the desktop. And it's important that you run updates here on your operating system, because then that way you have all the latest patches, all the latest bug fixes as of the release of Ubuntu, and that you grabbed from the ISO file from the web. And you also are protected for security purposes when you do update your system, because there are security updates that are generated and released all the time. Alright, so we're done here, and so let me go ahead and clear the screen, and let's go ahead and exit and get out of that. Alright, so let me go ahead and say remind me later here, because I've already done that, just did that just now. We don't need to do that anymore. And this, as I said, this is not a review of Ubuntu 20.04 LTS. Do that at some other point in time. But I just wanted to show you that for purposes of VirtualBox, updating the system, getting Ubuntu 20.04 LTS, or any distro of Linux for that matter, installed on a virtual machine is a very easy thing to do. You could see in this process how easy it was to install a virtual machine of Ubuntu 20.04 LTS in VirtualBox5. Hope you enjoyed it. Have the nice rest of your day, and take care. Bye-bye.